Isn't she something? She really is. Before we start, I want to say thank you to Larry Smith, and I want to acknowledge Senator Scott and Johnny Cordero, who's the chair of the Democratic Black Caucus of South Carolina, for being here. Thank all of you so much. Look, I want to take as many questions as I can. What I like to do as much as possible is have a conversation, not give a lecture. So I'll give you a little bit of who I am and why I'm running for president, but I'd like to keep it, I'm sure you'd like me to keep it short, and I'd like to keep it short too. So let me start by just saying this. I know that when I'm described in the press, they start off by describing me as a rich person. And people sometimes get a sense that I'm this two-dimensional billionaire. Actually, my mom was a teacher in the New York public schools. She tutored prisoners in the Brooklyn House of Detention. Not what you think of as being a real fancy person, and she wasn't. My dad was the first generation in his family to go to college. My grandfather was a plumber. My dad went to college. He went to law school. He was a lawyer. He stopped out being a lawyer to go into the Navy in World War II because he wanted to do his part for the country. And then because he was a lawyer and had gotten great grades in law school, they made him the assistant to the chief prosecutor at the Nuremberg trials of the Nazi war criminals. So my parents were actually brought us up as people who had to give, your job, Tom, is to give back as much to the United States of America as you get from the United States of America. They were Depression era, World War II babies. My father also said, if you see something wrong in the United States of America, then you should fight against it as early and hard and long as you have to. And he said that because he was the prosecutor of these Nazi war criminals, and he felt as if something went terribly wrong in Germany. And nobody really stood up to it until things happened that no one could have ever imagined when it started. And honestly, that's why I started the Need to Impeach movement. I thought there's something terribly wrong at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. 8.5 million people signed that petition. They called their congresspeople, they wrote their congresspeople, they emailed their congresspeople. They asked them to please do the right thing and have one law for everybody in the United States, hold the most corrupt president in America to account on behalf of the American people. And now here we are. I am running for president on for a really simple reason. Kat mentioned it. I think this government's broken. I think it's been bought by corporations. I think everybody in the United States knows it. The question is, how are we going to take back the government and make it of, by, and for the people? I have spent 10 years putting together coalitions of ordinary American citizens to take on and beat those corporations. You know, I started taking on oil companies over clean energy. People thought they could never be beaten. They're too rich. They're too well-financed. They're too mean. We got 70% of the vote. You know, I got a $2 a pack cigarette tax passed in my home state, $3 to $4 billion a year. The tobacco companies had won 17 times in a row before we took them on. We gave the money to Medi-Cal, which is health care for the lowest income Californians. Closed $1 billion corporate tax loophole that the legislature wouldn't close, gave the money to the public schools. I have been organizing people to beat corporations for over a decade, and we win. They're not that smart. And there are tens of millions more of us than there are of them. We just have to organize. I also started one of the largest grassroots organizations in the United States, which is called Next Gen America. We did the largest youth voter mobilization in American history in 2018. We went into 38 Republican districts. We more than doubled the turnout of young people. Young people are the biggest generation in America, the most diverse generation in America. They were voting at half the rate of other American citizens. That is not a representative democracy. And we went into 38 districts, more than doubled the turnout of young people, and 33 of those districts turned blue and went Democratic. If you look at what I've done, I am someone who believes take power away from Washington, D.C. and push it out to the people of the United States. I trust the people of the United States. Look, I'm for term limits of 12 years for Congress people and senators, all of them. If you want change in the United States, you need new and different people in charge of the government. We do, and I always say, 6-word argument for term limits. Mitch McConnell, Lindsey Graham, Chuck Grassley. If you want change, we gotta change. So, let me say this. Kat's right. I've said I'd make climate my #1 priority because we have to. That's just the fact. What I've also said is we can do it. We start with justice. We start with leadership in the communities, including in South Carolina. Look, I have met some amazing environmentalists in South Carolina, from Denmark, South Carolina, Deanna Berry, from Orangeburg, South Carolina, Harold Mitchell. I have met incredible environmentalists across this country, but I am always reminded about who lives in Flint, Michigan. I'm aware of who lives in Denmark, South Carolina. I know who lives in the San Joaquin Valley, where 1 million Californians can't drink the water from the tap safely. So it's justice-based. It's also the biggest job program in American history. If we're gonna rebuild America on an accelerated basis, we are gonna hire millions of Americans for good union jobs across this country to rebuild this country. It's gonna be the biggest job program that you've ever seen. It will be the biggest in American history. We also have to do it. So I've spent more than 12 years on this. We have to do it, we can do it, and we can do it in a way that we have cheaper energy, better pay, faster growth, and be healthier. So it is not, here we go. This is us changing us in a better way for all of us. The last thing I want to say before I take questions is this. I know what Mr. Trump is running on because he's said what he's running on. It's going to be a very simple message. He said it in December to a group of Americans in Florida. And this is pretty darn close to what he said, word for word. He said, "You don't like me, and I don't like you, but you're all gonna vote for me because if the Democrats get control of this government, they're gonna destroy the economy in 15 minutes and you can't afford it." That is actually his campaign. That's his campaign. He is basically saying to Americans, I am a criminal. You guys know that. I despise about 80% of you guys. You know that. And you despise me. In fact, you would never let me in the front door of your house. But you're all gonna vote for me because the Democrats are a bunch of socialists who don't know anything about growth, job creation, prosperity, and you can't afford that. You can't afford them. So regardless of what you think about me personally or what I stand for, you have to vote for me. That is actually going to be this campaign. Somebody is going to have to get on the stage with Mr. Trump in September and October and expose him. He actually is a fake business person. He was a failed business person. And he's been terrible for the American people in terms of economics. He's gonna get up there and claim he's been great. I spent 30 years building a business from scratch. I never inherited a dime from my parents. I was in one room, no employees, no windows in the room. I built a multi-billion-dollar international business. I know more about economics than Mr. Trump. What he's done to the American people, his tax plan was the biggest giveaway to rich people and big corporations in American history. Worst piece of economic legislation I've ever seen, worst I can imagine. And his trade war has been a flop. He keeps trying to move away from his trade war. It's been terrible for working people. It's been terrible for consumers, and it's awful for American farmers. I want a chance to go against him on the debate stage on economics and take him down. He beat 16 conventional Republican politicians in the primary in 2016, easily. And he beat the most prepared Democratic candidate for president, who'd been First Lady, the senator from New York State, and Secretary of State, who had an encyclopedic knowledge of policy and government. We're going to have to do something different. And I'm telling you, that is what I want to do. And honestly, that's why my numbers are good. That's why I have a lot of momentum. This campaign has a lot of momentum. Is people, as we get close, people have to realize job one is winning. We actually need a change desperately, and we can't afford not to make that change. And that's exactly what I'm asking you to let me do. So I'd love to take your questions. If there's something that I think that's really important that isn't asked, I may reserve the right at the end to talk about things that I think are really important. But as fast as possible, I'd like to answer as many questions as you have. So do we have a mic runner? Okay. Go for it.
Hi there.
And please give us your name so everybody will know.
Of course. Hi, Tom. My name is Allison LaValle, and I am currently a political science major at Coastal Carolina University. I recently completed my senior thesis on the effects of campaign contributions and the influence it can have on politicians. Companies whose primary business is the extraction, processing, and distribution of oil, gas, and coal try to leverage political contributions from PACs to promote policies that harm the health of our families and worsen the climate crisis. Will you reject all contributions over $200 from the PACs, lobbyists, or SEC-named executives of the fossil fuel industry?
So, Allison, let me start by saying yes, of course, but let me just talk a little more about this. Look, first of all, they would never give me $200 or $2 or 2 cents, because I've said I'll declare a state of emergency and we will move towards clean energy on day one. Look, if you look at corporations' ownership of our government, the idea that we would not be protecting the health and safety of every American in a way that will create millions of jobs, increase our health, and let us go back to leading the world in terms of values, morality, technology, it's hard to believe. You know, I spent 4 years working in exclusively bipartisan or nonpartisan ways to make the argument this is just better for Americans, every American. And I never really got a single Republican to listen. And so, in answer to your question, of course I will take that pledge. Of course I know their money is corrupting this system, and I know we're making devastatingly wrong choices so that they can have good quarterly income statements. And I promise you, I don't care about their quarterly income statements.
Thank you.
Tom, hi, I'm Brian Nolan from Marion, South Carolina.
Nice to meet you, Brian.
Thank you for coming out here. I run a small farm in Marion, and I do a little bit of investing, but nowhere near on the scale that you've been doing. I've been hearing about Elizabeth Warren's doing an FTT, or financial transaction tax. I don't invest much, but when I do invest, I don't want to be taxed while I'm investing, but I want to be taxed. I'll pay taxes after I invest. How do you stand on that, and what do you feel about those issues?
So, I have not been pushing a financial transactions tax not because I think it's a terrible thing, but because my experience of countries that have put them in, they're pretty easy to avoid. So whatever you think they're going to raise, actually what ends up happening is whatever exchange you target, people don't trade there anymore. They trade to someplace that doesn't have a financial transactions tax. So let me talk about what I actually want to do in terms of tax. I want to undo all the giveaways the Republicans have given to the richest Americans and to the biggest corporations. It's just wrong. I am for a wealth tax for the richest 1 out of 1,000 families. I believe the income disparities and inequality in this country is unbearable and unjust and un-American, but we have also redistributed the money in this country to the richest Americans from everybody else. And I believe it's a fair way to raise revenue, but it's also just to have a tax on wealth on an annual basis because of the disparities. A banana republic is not what America should be, and it's not a successful model for this country. And the third thing I would do is this, just so you know, I would treat people's investment income at the same rate that I treat people's earned income. Why would I be paying a lower rate on my investments than somebody who gets up and goes to work at 8 o'clock in the morning and earns a wage and comes home at 5 o'clock at night? If we just do that one thing, I promise I will give a 10% tax break to 95% of Americans, and there'll be money left over. We can actually, you know, Warren Buffett said 10 years ago, I pay a lower tax rate than my secretary, and it's not fair. It actually wasn't true 10 years ago, and it is true now. He pays a lower tax rate than his secretary, and he's the richest man in the United States of America. That makes no sense. That is just wrong. It is time for us to go back where you have a progressive tax rate, that you pay a higher rate as you make more money. And it's gone. That's crazy. We're seeing inequality at a level that's historically, I'll just say this. In 1980, the CEOs of the 100 biggest companies in the United States made 35 times the average income of their workers in their companies. Today, it's between 350 and 400 times. That makes no sense. That is not American. It's not what we should be going for. This country has got to get back to the idea that we succeed together, that we move up together, and the idea that a successful country gives all the money to the richest people is not American. It's not right. We have to change it and reverse it. And that's my idea. We're going to use taxes as part of the way to reverse that.
What will be your first initiative to combat climate change?
What would be my first move?
Initiative.
Okay, initiative. And what's your name, sir?
Gary.
Okay, Darren. So what I've said is I will declare a state of emergency on day one and use the emergency powers of the presidency. Now, what does that mean? It means we'll have a rule about the schedule on which we have to move from fossil fuel energy to clean energy. That in effect, we will say, you have to be this percentage clean energy by this date, and we'll be 100% clean by 2040. Can we do that? Yeah. You know, can solar, if you take a bid to create energy today, if you're a utility, the cheapest source of energy in the United States today is wind. And the second cheapest source of energy today in the United States of America is solar. Can we get to a place where we're 100% clean energy by 2040? Yes, we can. Just so you guys know, Iowa is 42% wind energy today. We can move so much faster on this than people understand. Will we have to rebuild the grid? Yes, we will. There'll be a lot of electricians doing work. There's a lot of work to be done, but we can do it, and that's the first thing. Second thing, the second biggest source of greenhouse gas emissions is transportation. You can talk about that in a lot of different ways, but basically it's cars. We're going to have to mandate when we stop producing internal combustion engines and move to clean energy in terms of transportation. We're also going to have to build a lot of public transportation. I can tell you, I pushed hard for something called Measure M in Los Angeles, which is a subway system for Los Angeles. It was supposed to create 500,000 jobs. I saw the mayor of Los Angeles about 6 weeks ago, and he said the current estimate is 775,000 jobs. We're going to have to move to public transportation and stop over a schedule the number of internal combustion engine cars on the road. Third, we're going to have actually have building codes. That we're going to have more efficient buildings because that's also a source. We can do it on a schedule. We've done this in California. These are things we can do. We have the technology. It's a lot of work to rebuild buildings. That's why there are going to be millions of jobs for people all over this country that are going to be well-paid union jobs. We can start with that. In terms of doing a lot, so those are rules. In terms of government spending, you need Congress to go along. I have a plan to do all of that in terms of actually spending tax dollars, but the Congress is going to have to go along with that. And so far, the Congress of the United States has never passed a climate bill. So we need to start with rules that a president can put in, and as it becomes clearer and clearer to everybody in the United States that we don't have a choice, but that we can do it and in a way that will make us better paid, healthier, then we're going to have to move to the next stage. But those are the first ones.
Hi. I'm over here.
Hi.
Fred Gable. I live in Florence. We moved here from California, from the Central Valley.
From where in the Central Valley?
Galt.
Okay.
My daughter is currently at the University of Maryland Chesapeake Biological Lab studying global warming.
No way.
Getting her PhD.
Right on the Chesapeake Bay.
She's on the bay, and she's actually studying in the Arctic. The hat I'm wearing is the Coast Guard cutter. She spends half her summer on. The question I have is, obviously climate change is a huge issue, but we're going to need a lot more people trained in STEM to get it beaten. Do you have a plan to get more women, especially women? Sadly, women are grossly underrated or underrated.
I'll help you out here.
There are not enough women involved in STEM. They're told they can't do it, whatever. So do you have a plan to get more people into STEM so they can help use their brains to solve this?
Sure. So let me first talk about education in general, and then I want to talk about a specific initiative I have. So I view education completely differently from the way this president and the Republicans view education. If you go to any red state in this country, and I've gone to lots of them because I did 50 town halls on impeachment, the Republicans' first move in every single one of those states, and this president's first move, is to cut taxes on rich people and big companies. It's the first move, and that's exactly what Mr. Trump did. And they do it in every single state they control. But the second move is to cut education. And it happens in every single state. Cut money for K through 12, cut money for higher ed in every single state. That reflects an attitude, which is that education is an expense in the budget. And therefore, as expenses in budgets, it should be minimized and controlled and kept down. And I view it exactly the opposite. As I said, my mom was a teacher. I believe that investing in young people is the greatest investment we can make in the country. I believe that starting really young is absolutely critical. So my brother has been an advocate for at-risk kids his whole life. And it was at least 30 years ago that he said to me, and he's never stopped saying it, if you don't get kids by the time they're 3, you might have blown it. And if you don't get them by 5, you've definitely blown it. So when I think about education, that's why I'm absolutely for universal pre-K. The number one correlation in our society with success, and however you define that success, is reading level in the 2nd or 3rd grade. That's the number one thing that determines your life outcome. So if you ask me, how much do I care about that? I have to care an amazing amount about that, and you can't start in first grade. So that's my first point, is I view education as an investment in America's future. It is literally, these are the future of America. So I view teachers completely differently. Teachers are the stewards of our future. They're professionals who need support, not to be minimized. They're not a cost to be minimized. They're professionals who are going to dictate how everything's going to turn out in our future. Completely different idea about money, completely different idea about how seriously to take them and their role in society. But let me say something else. If we have schools that are differential by income, if we have schools providing different opportunities and support in poor neighborhoods than rich neighborhoods, then we are legislating inequality for the next generation. And you cannot have this conversation in America without talking about race. You cannot. And if we like to use statistics, and that's my point about President Trump, is he likes to talk about statistics. Here's some statistics he never talks about. Mobility. The ability of young people to live the American dream, to be from a disadvantaged background and to succeed. If you look at the statistics about people, kids, starting in the bottom quintile, the lowest fifth in terms of income, and being able to move out of that fifth through their hard work, their talents, their ambition. I can tell you in Atlanta, Georgia, it's 1 out of 20 kids. That is no mobility at all. And there's nothing, no reason, no statistic, no truth that said those kids are any less talented in any way, shape, or form. That is a societal failure on a monumental scale. So you're asking me, what do we do? To me, what is a prosperous country? A prosperous country is a country where the people succeed, and the government supports them in that success, enables that success, and cares about that success, because that's how the country succeeds. So if a kid in Florence, South Carolina, is well educated, has a productive life, is a better citizen, that's great for him or her. And that's great for Florence. And that's great for South Carolina. It's also great for me in California. The country is better off, I'm better off. And the same thing is true for everybody here, for some kid from Fresno, California. If he or she succeeds, it's great for the people of South Carolina. That's a successful country. That's prosperity. That's the real deal of productive people being productive and living up to their capabilities. That's why the idea that education is an expense to be minimized, that shows you don't know the first thing about creating real prosperity in the United States of America.
This president has, my name is Scott Kaufman.
Scott, nice to meet you.
This president has been moving the judiciary in a more conservative direction. And with Ruth Bader Ginsburg's health issues, I see the specter of whoever's elected in 2020 nominating a new Supreme Court justice. What credentials, what criteria would a President Steyer look for in a Supreme Court justice or an appeals court judge and the like?
So, Scott, I'm going to answer your question, but I want to also take us back a little in terms of the Supreme Court. So obviously, President Obama had a Supreme Court pick in his last year, Merrick Garland, which Mitch McConnell decided, we're not going to do that, we're not going to consider it, we're not actually going to allow the President of the United States to nominate a justice for an open seat on the court. Wow. That was not actually an anomaly or an unusual occurrence. Actually, President Trump has appointed 1/4 of the federal bench in the last 3 years because actually Mitch McConnell didn't let President Obama nominate any judges to the federal bench. He blocked him. So you're asking me what would be, and I'll give you your answer, but I want to say something else. That is completely wrong. That was a rigging of the American system that put partisanship at a level that was completely wrong and just twisted the system. And they are trying as hard as possible to get a group of extremist right-wing jurists who are young to change the future of America for a generation by ignoring the actual rules of the Constitution. So I want to start by saying that's an issue that I want to address. Look, what would I be? I want somebody, of course, who has all the criteria. Kat Taylor, by the way, is a lawyer. My brothers are both lawyers. I'm not a lawyer, but of course we want someone who's a talented jurist. I want someone who's dedicated to the people of the United States. I want someone who is clearly justice-oriented with regards to every single measure of justice. Race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation. I have never supported someone for an office who did not support a woman's right to choose. I would never appoint a judge who didn't support a woman's right to choose. My attitude, look, I think we need to turn the page. You know, I think that all those measures of justice, of the full acceptance of human beings in all terms in the United States of America, that's where we have been going. We didn't start there. We started very far from there, but the progress in America is the full acceptance of human beings in every single way. And that's really what I'm going to be asking. If people are actually supporting the rights of corporations over the rights of human beings, I will not appoint them. I think they cut you off. You must be a dangerous character.
I'll tell you my question. Okay. It's about education. Can you be more?
And what's your name, sir?
My name is John. I'm here from Florence. Thank you for coming here.
My pleasure.
Can you be more specific about your plans to retain and attract K-12 teachers and to undo the damage of No Child Left Behind?
Okay. So let's talk for 1 second about what the federal government does and doesn't do in education, which I'm sure you know. Most of education is paid for at a local school district level or a state level. The federal government spends over $700 billion a year on defense. That number went up by 20% last year. The federal government spends a total of $70 billion on education. So when you're asking about what the plan is, my whole point in this is, when we think about teachers, I know that teachers are dramatically underpaid. I know that. That's the first point. But it's not the last point, because I know that teachers are also dramatically undersupported. I know that in the school, you know, in a lot of schools, there is no nurse. There is no mental health professional or librarian. I know that teachers don't get the time to prepare for class, that you don't just cut wages, you also give them more tasks to do so you can hire fewer people. So when I think about this, and I also think about this in terms of equity and equality, I want to make sure that we're supporting teachers. They run the schools, they control the classrooms. Anything we do is going to have to be in partnership with teachers, with them agreeing with us in what we have to do, because they run the classrooms. If they don't agree, they're not going to do it. That's my experience of all the people in my family who are teachers. So in answer to your question, I do want to do more Title I, which is money back into lower income districts. I do want, without any question, to have universal pre-K, because I think it's so critical. I do want teachers' pay to be better, but a lot of this is stuff where we're going to have to push, and I don't want to teach to the test. You know, my attitude on all of this is, teaching to the test is a failure. You know, the places where we have great education, we have a broad goal and a strategy of what we want to do, and then we everything goes towards that broad goal. It's not teaching to the test, it's much broader than that. And so when I think about what we're going to do, we need to talk about exactly the outcome we're going to try and get, and actually every single step is going to be how we're going to bring kids to that level. And if you think about it, not to be obvious, it's the 21st century. This is a time when it's run by information technology. Kids need to be well educated. Not everybody needs to go to college. There are a lot of things that we can do. Not everybody needs to go to college, but we need to have programs for kids to move into skilled, well-paid jobs as well. That's why I love community colleges. I love training programs done with unions. I love all the things that actually work to get kids a better life, a more productive life, and one where there's a clear path. Kids don't want to fail. American kids are real triers. They work their ass off. We need to give them a path broadly to succeed, and they will try their ass off. Hey.
Hello, hi, my name is Miko Pickett, and I'm from Marion County. And woohoo!
No.
And well, that's the great thing. It's a wonderful place to live, rural part of America. Unfortunately, we've been devastated by 3 federally declared national disasters in 2015, 2016, and 2018. This is now 2020. And you drive around, although the funding is there, you do not see the recovery. And on top of that, we have 26% poverty. So in our community, we're struggling with disaster recovery, we're struggling with poverty. My question for you is, where do you stand on the recovery from disasters? And you could talk about Puerto Rico and other places as well.
So, Miko, I think you're asking 2 questions. One is recovery from disaster, and the other is the rural-urban divide. So, look, the United States, I'm pushing for climate because the United States of America has to stand behind its citizens in disaster. And we can see that disasters, as you said, are piling up, and they're not going to stop. The problem with this climate is we're not stopping here. This is the good days. This is going to get worse. And if you look at the costs of dealing with it, which we have to do, they're unbearably high. So first of all, we just have to do that because a country has to stand behind its citizens when they're desperate. But let's talk for a second about the rural-urban divide, which is very real in the United States today. Rural America is really suffering. And I see it everywhere I go. I can tell you, one of the things people do not know is that farmers are committing suicide at twice the rate of vets. There is a gigantic pain and mental health issue in rural America because times are so hard and people are so sad. So what are we going to, so part of it is we need to spend the money on mental health. And it's an underappreciated, under-resourced situation that people don't like to talk about, including the people who are suffering from mental health issues because they're embarrassed. But we have to talk about it, we have to spend the money, and we have to have mental health facilities, specifically in rural areas. That's one point. Second point, I've also put aside $75 billion to deal with opioids across this country because that's a symptom of mental health, but it's not mental health itself, it's a symptom. In my rural plan, it starts with connectivity, that you have to have broadband in every part of rural America so that you can be connected to urban America, so that you can live there and function effectively. You also need roads. Connectivity is not just about on the internet, it's also physically being able to get places and being connected, rebuilding roads and bridges. And let me say something about money in rural America. Obviously, this trade war has been terrible for farmers. It's crushed farmers, it's taken away some of the biggest customers. in terms of solving climate, we are going to have to not just stop doing stuff that creates greenhouse gases. We're going to have to actually do this thing, sequestering carbon. Fancy words. What does that really mean? Grow things, plant things. Where do you think we're going to do it? Not in Times Square, not in downtown Los Angeles. We're going to have to go to the farmers of America and to rural America where there are big open places and where people actually know how to grow things, and sit there and talk together about what to grow and how and where, and then pay them for the service they're doing for the country and the world. It's going to be a big new source of revenue. If you go to Iowa and look where they're 40% wind energy, there are wind turbines all over Iowa. They're on farms. The farmers are being paid for those wind turbines. We're going to have to reconnect rural and urban. We're going to have to insist that people in rural America have rights to decent schools, period, and decent health care, period. And I know there's an issue in South Carolina about having enough health facilities around the state so people don't die on the way to the doctor. Yeah, I'm telling you, I think affordable health care is a right for every American. If you have to wait 41 minutes for the ambulance and 50 minutes on the drive, people are gonna die on the way to the doctor, and it's happening. So that's what I'm gonna do. I know there's a huge rural-urban divide. I know you have to be able to have the facilities and the services in rural America so people can choose to live there safely and their families can be educated, and then there needs to be a connection between the two parts, and I'm gonna bring in a big new revenue source. John, hey you guys, Johnny Cordero has a question, and I'm nervous.
Thank you. We've discussed before the issue of reparations, so I know what your position is on reparations. In fact, I wouldn't be here if I did not know what your position was on
I'm
reparations.
for reparations.
Okay.
We should jump to the chase here.
But my question is this. With 71% roughly of African Americans being in favor of reparations and somewhere in the neighborhood of 80% of white Americans being opposed to reparations, as President of the United States with the bully pulpit to speak from, how would you approach bringing this discussion to the fore and getting legislation done to do that, given the circumstances?
Right. So the question is, did you guys hear it? How do we actually bring the country along to a place where people understand that reparations make sense for everybody? And here's what I would do. What I've said is, I believe that policy comes out of narrative. And so on the first day of my presidency, I would start a formal commission on race. And I would say that commission needs to retell the story of the last 401 years. Because what we need, policy comes out of narrative. If we tell the true story, we'll get the just policy. We didn't just get here. We didn't arrive here today. Things happened and we need to be truthful about it. And so, what does that mean? I think people always think that we're talking, I can tell you nobody in California, that's a little bit, Kat Taylor reminded me, that's an overstatement. Hardly anyone in California knows what Jim Crow was. So there has to be a story of what happened over the last 401 years in terms of legalized discrimination and injustice. That story has to be told so everybody knows it's true. But it's not just that. We also have to tell the story about the contribution to America's growth and success and prosperity of the African American community. And that's not just building America, although it includes building America. We're also talking about the moral leadership that the African American community has provided to this country for generations and centuries. We're about to have Martin Luther King Day. That is a symbol to me of a much broader point, Johnny. That the moral leadership didn't start with Dr. King or end with Dr. King. That in fact, and I'll tell you one quick story that to me is always meaningful. The United States Congress gave George W. Bush very broad anti-terrorist powers that basically gave him the right to wage war when he wanted to. And I think almost everybody now, at least Democrats, think that was a mistake. It was unanimous in the Senate of the United States. There was one congressperson who voted against it. One out of, 350. The one congressperson who voted against that basic, extremely broad war power for George W. Bush was a woman named Barbara Lee, who is a congresswoman from Oakland, California, who's an African-American woman who said it's not right. And she's the only person who voted against it. And she had a lot of death threats, and she had to have full-time protection. But she said, I'm going to stand up for what's right because I really believe this. And you know what? She was right. That's leadership. That's guts. That's moral clarity. That's the story that has to be told, because I believe out of narrative comes policy. And I can tell you, here's a policy that I've put forward specifically with regards to this, which is $125 billion over 10 years to the historically black colleges and universities. And this is out of narrative comes policy. These are schools that were started, some of them before the Civil War, that were started because black kids couldn't go to the mainline colleges and universities. So these schools have produced over half of the African American judges, doctors, teachers, engineers, and generals. The schools have worked. They've been a true lifeline for kids in the South. They've also lost 42% of their federal funding over the last 10 years. They are starved for cash. They have very high tuition, which means the kids come out with very high student loan balances because they don't have big endowments and they don't have a lot of federal support or state support anymore. So why would I want to absolutely reinvigorate and reinvest in these schools? There's a historical reason they exist. They work. It's an important point for this state, for the kids who go there, for the communities that they're placed in, and also for everybody else in this state. So when I think about it, here it is. We have institutions that work on multiple levels in terms of prosperity and opportunity and mobility and justice. Isn't that what we're supposed to be supporting? You guys, Jonathan Metcalf has told me that there are a bunch of people here who we should recognize, who are important, and I want to read their names and ask them to stand up. I'm going to take a question after this. Miko Pickett, come on. We already met her. Beth Wicker from the Chesterfield Executive Committee, thank you. Dion Taylor from Marion. Dion, thank you. Jerry Jacobs from the Marion Executive Committee. Jerry. Kyrene Lyles from Marlboro. How you doing? And Maddie Thomas from who's the Florence County Chair. Hello. Oh no. Oh no. Oh no. There's trouble in the house. So Jonathan's telling me one more question. Okay. What's your name, ma'am?
Amelia.
Nice to meet you.
If you were elected president, what would you do about school shootings?
Okay. So let me say this. Amelia, I told you that I believe that this government is broken because it's been bought by corporations. And if you look at gun violence in our country and you ask, how is it possible that we have this level of gun violence? Then I would say to you, over 90% of Americans want mandatory background checks on every gun purchase. More Republicans as a percentage want it than Democrats. 70% of NRA members want mandatory background checks on every gun purchase, and we don't have it. Because the NRA is actually controlled by the gun manufacturers, and they won't let the Senate even bring it up. So when I talk about this, this is about government being sold to corporations. So what would I do? Look, if you look at what my platform is, I am for mandatory background checks. I am for gun licensing. I am for registering assault weapons. I'm for stopping the sale of assault weapons and high-capacity magazines. I'm for a voluntary buyback of ARs. I'm for red flag laws. Look, if you look at the mass shootings in our country, which really is what you're talking about, we had 400 last year. The country with the next most mass shootings was Mexico with 5. We're off the charts. But we also have an extraordinarily high level of spousal abuse with gun violence associated. We have streets that people are scared to walk down and communities people are scared in. I can tell you that I think every single day this week I've talked to a mom who's lost her child to gun violence on the street. Every single day. And 60% of gun-related deaths are suicides. So we know that actually it's the ubiquity of guns, it's the number of guns per person in society that's related to mass shootings and gun deaths. And so from my point of view, reducing the number of guns in society in all the ways I described and keeping them out of the hands of people who are by definition unsafe to hold guns is something that we absolutely should be doing in this society. So let me say for a second, let me talk about the Second Amendment. You know, one thing that you guys should know is Kat Taylor and I raise grass-finished cattle, chickens, and pigs. And on our ranch, we give gun safety classes for anybody who wants to come to be a responsible gun owner for free. I recognize that there's a Second Amendment of the Constitution of the United States. I also recognize that a first grader has a right not to have to do active shooter drills, that kids have a right not to die. There is not one law in the United States that cuts across and abrogates every other law. You know, we have a right to free speech in this country. You do not have a right to yell fire in a crowded theater because you endanger other people's lives. In every one of these rights, there is a right, and then there are the rights of the other people that are affected by that right. We can respect the Second Amendment easily, and also respect the rights of kids not to get killed in the classroom, of people to be free to walk down their streets without being fear of dying and getting shot, of people who are worried about their spouse using a gun on them. And also, let's remember, let's keep guns out of the hands of people who are desperately sad. Keeping down the number of guns in our society and keeping them away from the most dangerous people is something we absolutely should be doing, and I will push for it really hard, and I think Americans across the board want, including responsible gun owners. The gun manufacturers want to sell as many guns as they can to whoever can come up with the money, and we have to push back very hard against them. So, you know, I want to say one last thing, which is this. Look, I have been traveling around the United States full time for 7 years. It's been an incredible privilege. I've been politically organizing, going door to door, registering young people on campuses, holding town halls, and doing this. And I know there's some people who didn't get to ask me questions, and if you come up afterward, I'd be happy to answer. I'll stick around as long as I possibly can. I love doing this. But I can tell you this. Running for president, people talk a lot about programs and policies and governmental laws. And there's a lot, and that's fine with me. I'm happy to do my homework and answer those questions. But actually what's going on in the United States is way simpler than that. What we're seeing in this country is the Republicans are basically cutting taxes, and then they are being cruel to Americans on the argument that there's no money to help. And it's actually almost unbearable to see, because what we're seeing is people suffering, American citizens suffering, young kids, working age people, seniors, suffering for reasons that honestly all have to do with money, all have to do with really low taxes on rich people and big corporations. So when you ask me what would I do about taxes, I am going to undo those tax cuts for rich people and big corporations, because honestly, I can't stand anymore a society that tells American citizens no health care, go ahead and die. We cannot have that anymore. We cannot have people who are saying, I can buy my meds or I can pay my rent. We're way too rich a country for that. We cannot have 1 out of 20 young people able to move out of the lowest quintile. That is unacceptable in the United States of America. This is supposed to be a country where every kid gets a chance to go as far as possible. 1 out of 20 isn't even within a country mile of fair or just. What we're seeing is cruelty to American citizens. Look, you want to know a statistic I care about? This is the 3rd year in a row that American life expectancy has gone down. And the 3 of the 4 big reasons are alcoholism, drug addiction, and suicide. Those are called deaths of despair. That is not a successful country. That is a country where people are so sad, they're either self-medicating or killing themselves. We have to turn the page. Look, I know we have to solve this climate crisis, we really do, and we can do that. But we have to take back this government and make it serve the people of the United States again, because it is unbearable to see this level of suffering from American citizens. And let me say this. I played sports my whole life. I played team sports my whole life. And if you're on a team, then you are totally committed to your teammates. That is a deep relationship of respect and trust and love. And my attitude in this is very simple. I view the American people as my team. Nobody runs down the field and kicks my teammate in the face. That will never happen. And that's my point. That will never happen. If you vote for me for president, I promise you, there is no day, there is no second that I will let someone walk down and pick on an American citizen for money. I'm not 99% in on that. I am 100% in. That does not happen regardless of what it costs. Thank you very much.